Now, for those of you who are hoping to lose a few pounds, a new report says it's what we eat rather than how much we eat that really counts. That's according to research in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Public Health England has found that more than 40% of adults gained weight during the pandemic, so there are plenty of people out there who need to shift a few kilos. Oh, we've moved to new money. But maybe, like me, you've grown up being told to eat less and exercise more if you want to lose weight. So how do we go about safely doing it? Joining me in the studio is consultant cardiologist and public health collaboration chairman, Dr. Aseem Malhotra, friend of the show. So I know that we bang on about this all the time, don't we? But, I mean, for those out there who are used to calorie counting, surely that is a good way to lose weight. I mean, is it not an effective way to lose weight?
Well, first of all, Alex, I think we need to just put this in context. The situation regarding population's weight is really dire. So, you said 40% of people are, obese in this country, or almost 40%. In fact, if you look at excess body fat, it's around 80% of people, adults in this country, have body fat levels which are harmful to health. So it's a huge problem. So how have we got here? How did this all happen? And it happened because dietary guidelines, one very plausible theory, is that the dietary guidelines that changed in the late 70s in the US and the early 80s in the UK asked everybody to go low fat. And as a result, people increased their intake of carbohydrates, but in particular, refined low quality carbohydrates. And when you look at the evidence, you look at studies and people's own experiences, what you find is that those sorts of foods are low quality carbs, are the ones that raise insulin and glucose, and they drive hunger and they drive weight gain. When people cut the carbs, the low quality carbs, the starches and the sugar, for example, they find their hunger improves and they're able to lose weight much more easily. Now, you said counting calories. It's failed. Eat less, move more has completely and totally failed. We've been hearing this message for decades. And the reason it's failed is twofold. One is when people cut their calories specifically just to lose weight, they will often lose weight, but they regain it because they're fighting hunger. The other thing is that we know now that exercise, although great for health, has almost no impact on weight loss whatsoever. No. And for many people, it can actually, no impact at all. In fact, I published an editorial several years ago in the British Journal of Sports Medicine saying that we have to, bust the myth of obesity and physical inactivity, because all the data suggests it's what you eat, not how much exercise you do.
What would you say are the main offenders? Because, a lot of people out there will think that a healthy diet could be pasta salads and brown bread and rice and things like that. So you're saying, no, not those things.
No. I think we need to concentrate on good nutrition. So are these foods nutritious? And also think about the types of foods that are going to have the biggest impact on insulin, glucose, a high glycemic index load carbohydrates, which is what this very excellent paper in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition talks about. It's much more plausible and makes sense that those are the foods to avoid, and not to worry about how much fat you're eating, or nutritious foods in particular, such as eggs and steak, oily fish, obviously a mixture of vegetables, non-starchy, and low sugar fruits. I think for most people in this country who are now have excess body fat, the best thing they can do is to start by cutting out these carbohydrates, and they will find, as I do with my own patients, their health markers will improve very quickly and they're likely to lose weight as well.
Well, we can now bring in Gary Taubes. He's author of The Case Against Sugar and Why We Get Fat. Gary, delighted to have you join us today. I mean, you've heard what Aseem's had to say. Have we been approaching weight loss the wrong way?
Yeah, but I think it's a little more profound than that, in the sense that we've been approaching weight gain the wrong way. The reason we get the advice to eat less and exercise more is because we also believe that people get fat because they eat too much. It's a sort of, prime dogma of obesity research. You take in more calories than you expend, and that's why you get fat. And one thing this paper in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition is trying to do is to get people back to the idea that obesity is in effect a hormonal disorder. It really is a hormonal regulation. The hormones that drive it are, as Aseem mentioned, the prime hormones involved are insulin and glucagon. And the foods we eat, the macronutrients, carbohydrates, protein, and fats that we eat, have very different effects on insulin and glucagon levels. So you end up with this idea that obesity, the carbohydrates in the diet, particularly the refined carbohydrates, are literally fattening, just as my mother's generation was taught, maybe your grandmother's. And then if you don't want to put on excess weight or you want to lose the weight you put on, these are the foods you have to avoid.
Why is it then that this simple dietary advice, that carbohydrates is potentially the serial offender, mind the pun, when it comes to obesity, why is it that, people regard things such as a ketogenic diet or an Atkins diet or a paleo diet or a very low carb diet as sort of novelty diets rather than the right sort of diet?
Well, this is what I've been writing about for 20 years. As Asim mentioned, beginning in the 1960s. So in the 1960s, the idea, conventional wisdom is carbohydrates are fattening. I love to quote an article from the British Journal of Nutrition written in 1963, co-authored by one of the leading British dietitians. Every woman knows carbohydrates are fattening. And then between the 1960s and the 1980s, the shift occurred to this belief that dietary fat causes heart disease. And so we should all avoid fat. And when you're avoiding fat, you replace it with carbs. So carbohydrates transitioned from sort of inherently fattening to heart-healthy diet foods. And that coincides with this obesity epidemic in virtually every nation in the world. We think there are just a lot of ways that medical science tends to embrace ideas before they've been rigorously tested. And that's what happened in this field. We embrace this idea that obesity is caused by eating too much, and then we embrace this idea that dietary fat causes heart disease, and they both happen to be almost assuredly wrong. And in the process, we threw out a lot of common sense, which was people who fatten easily are different than people who are lean, that there really is a hormonal dysregulation. And again, if you look at what hormones regulate fat accumulation, it's insulin. So you have to avoid carbohydrates.
And how puritanical a regime does this need to be? Is it a case of getting rid of all of them? I mean, if we get rid of all carbohydrates, are we not at risk of missing out on other vital nutrients and minerals and fibers that our body might need?
Well, as people like to say, there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. Your body, one of the misconceptions that's driven this poor thinking over the past 40 years is that our brains prefer to use carbohydrates for fuel, or glucose for fuel, which isn't actually true. You can eat the kind of diet, for instance, that Asim recommends and prescribes to his patients, or a ketogenic diet, which is basically fat and protein and green leafy vegetables, and you're going to get all the vitamins and minerals you need. You can still get the fiber you need from the green leafy vegetables. The idea is some people are just so sensitive to the carb content of the diet. Their bodies are so sensitive to the insulin secretion from the carbohydrates that if they want to lose weight, they have to pretty much abstain from carbs entirely, and that means a ketogenic diet or Atkins. All keto is, or Atkins, is a diet that removes the carbs and replaces them with fat. Many of us, if we just want to stay healthy and lean, we just cut back and don't have pasta every night, just have it on Thursday nights, as we did growing up.
And just briefly, I'll throw back to you, Asim. What about when it comes to drinks? Because it's very easy, isn't it, to sort of try and have a keto diet, but you could be chugging back all sorts of carbohydrates in what you're actually ingesting in liquid form.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to drinks, Alex, I think the most important thing, actually, something that's free, is just really drink water if you're worried about your health. Of course, other types of drinks that people like to enjoy in a social setting is alcohol, and this is a separate discussion, but drinking in moderation isn't a problem. The real problem from drinks comes from these, in America they call them sodas here, sugary drinks, and juices. People have been misled thinking juices are healthy, but actually juices are very rapidly digestible carbohydrates that are going to spike insulin and glucose. They don't make you feel full, and you end up consuming more. So actually, I think water is probably the best drink to have.
Oh, that's not a very exciting answer, but I'll let you get away with it. Gary, Asim, thank you so much for joining me and giving the nation the health advice we all need. You're watching The Afternoon Agenda with me, Alex Phillips. Don't go anywhere.